So I'm very impressed with the turnout on day 2 after lunch with Bruegel across the street. So thank you all for being here. And I mean it that we'd love to make this as interactive as possible, the method being through Slido. So really do send questions. We're going to approach this one a little differently and not really have keynotes, but kind of launch into a dialogue really right from the beginning. I'll quickly introduce the panelists, though. So to my immediate left is Paul Polman, who is the CEO of Unilever, who made news yesterday, who announced his retirement, effective, I think, January 1st, will mean he will have completed an amazing 10-year run at Unilever. To his left is Isabelle, is it Kocher, who is the CEO of Engie. I tried to pronounce that Engie, and she said, no, it's Engie. She's held that position for more than 2 years, was previously COO and Deputy CEO of this company, French energy generation and distribution company. To her left is Roger Martin, who's the director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the Rotman School of Management in Toronto. Prior to that, he was dean at Rotman for 15 years. And to my far left is Robin Stalker, who is on the he's advisory board member of Accounting for Sustainability. He's a member of the Supervisory Board of Germany's Commerzbank. And prior to that, he was CFO of Adidas for 17 years. So we're going to launch right into it. As I said, there was the big announcement of Paul's retirement. Paul, in many ways, you have been kind of a standard bearer for, I guess I would say, the values that animate a group like this, standing for kind of long-termism, sustainability for these values. We're all a little worried with you gone that that we will lose something because, again, you really stood out as somebody who was clearly fighting these battles and sometimes against significant opposition. So just to sort of get us going here, if you could talk a little bit, it's too early to do a retrospective, but some of the struggles that, the victories and the challenges that you face trying to lead, an overt, aggressive, long-term agenda in a complicated market.
No, thanks, Adi. And I'm actually here because we announced it yesterday. I just flew in from New York, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity. But I'm here, obviously, to tell you I'm unemployed as of January. So if anybody has a job, let me know. Because my wife definitely doesn't want me at home full time. And I can't blame her. So what we were trying to do in Unilever, we're still trying to do. I'm actually not so worried that will there be a risk because I move on, because it should never be invested in one person. That would be very bad leadership. I think it's very well ingrained in our board, in our company, in our brands, but more importantly in my successor, Alan Job, who is an incredible person and very well prepared for the job. We've been working on this quite a long time to create an internal talent pool, and we're very blessed in that sense. What we were trying to do, we might have been a little bit early in our times and certainly got some pressures from certain corners where when you launch new concepts, it's always more difficult to tread new paths or start new things in terms of the vested order you have to deal with. But what we basically said was, after the crisis of 2007, 2008, hey, this system isn't really working anymore for everybody. We need to have a system that is more inclusive. We have to have a system that takes care of our planetary boundaries. We have to have a system that takes care of our scarce resources, moves the financial market more to the longer term to give space to do that. So we put this model out there called Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, decoupling our growth from environmental impact, improving our overall social impact. Because the trust in society is fairly low, hasn't really improved. We put out 50 targets because I believe very firmly that the more transparent you are, that then the better chance you have to get trust, which is ultimately this basis of prosperity. So off we went. We've 10 years on. We've probably, we are close to our target of reaching 1 billion people improving their health and well-being. We've created 5 million jobs for women in our value chain, smallholder farmers. We are now about 70% sustainably sourced in all of our materials. But increasingly, as we were doing this, I discovered, and one of the reasons I joined Unilever, reaching 2.5 billion consumers a day and being in 8 out of 10 households in the world, and being probably the biggest company in the emerging markets, where we have over 60% of our business, is increasingly it was important to me not only for Unilever to do the right thing, because I might not have been fully committed that long. 10 years is a long time, but then I discovered more, how can I use the size and scale of Unilever to drive the more transformative changes that we need in this world? How do we change the financial market? How do we move from only doing return on financial capital to including social and environmental capital? How do we find an economic system that doesn't reward the capital, but also rewards labor in a different way? So we got ourselves into many more of the transformative things, and that led to the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. Probably one of the things I would be most looking back at my time being on that high-level panel developing the goals. It led to Paris, the climate change agreements, and we're now very much into these transformative things and created organizations around that to drive these tipping points. Isabelle, who is a wonderful leader as well, has just joined the B team, where we have a group of heroic leaders trying to take with courage their own personal risks to move these systems forward. So I think we've come a long way, because the world has realized that things need to be different. Unfortunately, it's playing out differently in the marketplace, which is where the challenge is. In the marketplace, you see polarization, you see barriers being built, you see elections not turning out the way you hope. We've seen that now again in Brazil, and we've seen it in many other places. So politically, it feels like we've actually slipped back. And that's a little bit disheartening, but it has made us more determined to move forward. What we now find ourselves in is in a world where everybody knows what we need to do, what direction we need to take. I'm fairly convinced of that. We should not get sidetracked anymore with the few people that want to maintain their vested order. So we know where to go, but we're not going fast enough now, and we're not doing it at the speed and scale that is needed. So this is what I will be focused on in, if you call it my afterlife. I just was elected chairman of the International Chambers of Commerce, so that's 35 million companies. I run the UN Global Compact for the Secretary General with the B team and others. What we're now trying to do is, can we move the private sector a little bit faster at scale to be sure that we save humanity? It really boils down to that, Adi, to be honest.
Okay, so I want to come back to you later on some of the challenges, because that almost made it sound easy, but I want to question you on some of the difficulty in bringing certain shareholders along. But Roger, maybe you can help set context. You know, we're all in this room. We all believe in long-termism. We wave the banner. But I want, you know, maybe you could sort of bring this down to earth a little bit. I mean, you know, is it meaningful when we're talking about long-termism? Is this a sort of politically correct but perhaps somewhat meaningless pursuit, or, you know, does the science say there's some real value here? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I guess my view is it's pretty fundamental. I mean, it relates to the role of investment in making the world prosperous, right? So, I mean, if you want to go back to the start, when we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't invest, right? We were hand to mouth, and we tried to find enough stuff to live on. When we moved to an agrarian economy, it meant saving and investing, right? You had to save some of the seed corn at the end of the harvest and not eat it, so that you could have next year's crop, right? And we got more prosperous when that happened. And then Industrial Revolution, it meant investing in machinery and equipment, big factories, and in due course investing in R&D and branding and the like. So all of that accelerated the growth and prosperity of the economy. But investment was the absolute key. And so why does long-termism matter? It matters if you're going to invest. You have to have an investment horizon that is long enough term to pay off the investment. So you're not going to save the seed corn and not eat it if you don't think the next year's growing season is going to be stable enough for you to benefit from having made that investment. And most of the investments that the modern company makes that are going to move the ball forward, make the company more prosperous, give better products and services, are investments that don't pay back in 1 year or 6 months. They pay back in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years and in 20 years. And so if we have an economic environment that makes it hard to have a stable platform for as long a period as the investment takes to pay back, companies just won't invest. And it's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why we're having huge, increasingly sized cash balances. Because you do not know if you're going to be attacked because this quarter was a bad quarter, and then the lowest form of life in the business world, the activist hedge fund, is going to come and attack you, and so you'll say, I won't invest. So I think it's absolutely fundamental to economics. It isn't sort of a wishy-washy thing. Wouldn't it be nice if we thought long-term? It's if we have stable enough platforms to invest, we will invest, the world will become more prosperous through the investment, and if we don't, we are not going to invest the way we need to, that is optimal, and we will all be poorer, and the prospects for better things for the future will be lower.
So let me just follow up quickly on that. So in theory, that sounds absolutely right. You talk a lot about companies with sustainable competitive advantage, and it would seem there are a lot of companies that seem to manage both, and plenty of CEOs who would say, hey, my compensation is long-term based, so the incentives are actually aligned properly. So these companies do well in the short term, and Unilever did well in the short term, and as it sort of built a kind of long-term thing. So, are these necessarily as much at odds as you're suggesting?
No, they are only at odds in the extreme, right? And so on CEO compensation, it's to me it's less relevant than people make it out to be. CEOs in general, all the CEOs I know say I make more money than I ever thought I was going to make or actually need, and so it isn't a big motivator. What CEOs want is to be able to do something useful with their company, make a mark that's good for the world, like Isabelle and Paul. And if they have such kind of insanely driven short-term pressures, it makes it harder to do that job. But it's only at the extreme end of that. And right now the financial markets are behaving in a fashion that is at the extreme end. And the worst creatures in it are activist hedge funds who claim, right, their general claim is, well, we're going to come in and help manage the company to make it better. Their average holding period for all, this is US data, US activist hedge funds is 424 days. I would ask Isabelle and Paul, can you turn around anything in 424 days? The answer is no. And so that's where the pressure is hitting, with just insanity about you've got to produce tomorrow. And if you don't, we're going to make it impossible for you to try and accomplish what you accomplish. That is wrecking big companies and wrecking patterns of investment, I think, in the modern economy.
So Isabelle, I want to bring you into this. So you're embarking on a pretty significant transformation at Engie. We talked about Paul. Paul is almost sort of canonized by his supporters, and it's called St. Paul, or we called him Captain Planet in Harvard Business Review. Do you need to be, do you need to be a hero or a superhero to sort of lead a long-term transformation at a particularly a public company?
Well, the heroes are, if any, are not the leaders, but the people on the ground, because they are in front of this paradox between long-term and short-term every day. And we are in a situation where long-term action is really needed, desperately needed, and where, in fact, short-term reality seem to be the priority. And we all receive, I'm sure Paul, you received also beautiful letters from investors saying, you have to invest long-term, we are with you, we support, and for spending a lot of time with investors in your show, I can tell you what matters is cash generation during the last quarter. So this is the reality of today. It is changing, I have to say, to be honest. It is changing, but too slowly. A big French fund, Amundi, decided a few weeks ago, that's very recent, to put in place on a very systematic basis strong and mandatory CSR criteria on all the investment lines. So it is moving. This is more a question of pace. In my view, as a CEO, it's not an arbitrage between social responsibility and value creation. I don't believe so. In fact, the expectations are changing so fast that if you don't take into account what is expected, you are dead. The reality is that. And look at that's also very recent, the manifesto, the Green Manifesto. Some French students signed recently, 24,000 students. They joined the signature of that over only 6 weeks, if I remember well, saying we don't want to work for companies who are not putting at the core of the strategy the protection of environment. We just won't. So that's something that is tectonic, ballistic. And then the point is that as an industrial company, we have an inertia, you know? We cannot change our footprint like that overnight. So we need to anticipate that. So that's less a question of, that's not a question of heroism, it's more just to be rational. And so in the energy field, that's true that we were in front of this dilemma before other sectors, probably, because the energy sector is responsible for 60% of CO2 emissions. So when you are a world leader in that domain, you have a choice to make. As far as we are concerned, we screened 3 years ago, we screened our activities, and we tried to assess what proportion of these activities we could transform in activities compatible with zero carbon. And we came to the answer, which is more or less 80%. So it also means that we had 20% which were not compatible with that vision. And we decided to shift. We stopped these 20%. That is to say that we accepted to shrink the company, and doing so, effectively, it's a bit counterintuitive for a listed company to shrink a company regarding the usual parameters that are assessed by the investors. But the bet was that doing so, we would be quickly able to show that it is more value creative to do so. So we decided to do that very quickly, not to stay too long in the middle, to redeploy massively, so 15 billion euros of investment roughly, and to invest massively in everything that will be at the core of the new energy world, and to close the gap with competitors. That was the bet. So we are 3 years afterwards, after this decision. So where are we today? We redeployed this money. We effectively got attractiveness. This is, well, we can measure it. From a talent perspective, very clear. We have 60% of resume per year more than 2 years ago. From growth perspective also, we were in negative organic growth, which is normal in one sense. We were no longer aligned with, no longer in touch with what was expected. So the normal and rational consequence of that is that you lose clients. That's basic. So we were at minus 9% per year of organic growth, organic decrease, minus 9% per year. And 3 years afterwards, we are at plus 5. So, and it was critical for us to be rapid, because if you are not rapid, at a certain moment, the investors, they tell you, okay, that's good, but where is the value creation? And more importantly, we got a level of commitment internally that was absolutely great, because civil society is in our company also. And the more we align with people, with what people they want, with what makes sense for them, the more they are engaged, the more they are committed, the more they are efficient for the company. And we got, which was not absolutely sure, but we got also a better return for activities. So I believe that the obsession, at least my obsession, is, after this period, to create a system that is permanently in situation to create the condition to make that at each and every moment we stay in touch with. We stay in touch with expectations. I mean, we paid a lot the fact that in our sector we have been, probably slow to understand what happened around us. So my obsession is to create a system that is sensitive, if I can say so. And the best way I know is to manage that that everybody in the company feels responsible for feeling that. There's not just one boss somewhere in a tower that is responsible for doing so. That's absolutely inefficient. But to send people at the periphery, to send people in contact with external and external stakeholders. We triggered a huge, and we do that on a very, very regular basis. We triggered a huge consultation to prepare our next action plan, asking everybody in the company, the 155,000 people in the company, to go to discuss with who they want. So some ask the energy minister of a country, some ask their dentist or their mother-in-law. I mean, just to give feeling from the society, and to become, and then to multiply the strategic thinking. That's I believe a lot in that, and in the empowerment of our teams. I believe that's the best way to stay absolutely never, but to stay in touch with what really happens around us at a pace that is more and more rapid.
So just to follow up, because this is really at the heart of the sort of short-term versus long-term. It seems that you realize what the future economy will look like and what a company like Engie needs to do to survive in that future. And you're asking shareholders and stakeholders, I think you're saying, to accept a lower rate of return as you get from here to there. Is that impossible? Explain a little bit. Did you ask shareholders and stakeholders to accept a lower rate of return? And if so, how did you do that? We'd all like to know. Or did you have to say, don't worry, we will still hit our numbers along the way?
No, we say to our shareholders, look, we'll shrink the company, but concentrate on businesses that have a better growth perspective, and then on which you could put some higher multiples. Plus the fact that we will be more efficient because more committed, and then we constantly improved our returns. Again, that's not an arbitrage between value creation and responsibility.
Yeah, okay. So Robin, let's get you in this. So you, as we said, were a CFO at Adidas for many, many years. There's maybe an assumed tension between, visionary CEOs and the CFOs who are responsible for the bottom line. But I want to give you a chance to talk about, the role of CFO and people with that mindset in actually driving companies towards some of these non-financial goals.
So thanks, Ari. I think the role of the CFO is an absolutely critical one here. Obviously, we love to have visionary CEOs, and we need visionary CEOs. But the role of the CFO, and I would widen that to be all of the finance function, actually, is based on the simple ingredients of credibility, integrity, and also our role in providing transparency. A company needs to understand what its own determination of success is, and presumably that is used in the various decisions that the company makes. Finance is involved in each one of those decisions at all the levels. So I'm not just talking up here just at the key strategic decisions that are taken at the board level. At each level of the business, people are making trade-offs. They're having to decide, do we send a particular shipment per air freight or sea freight? Do we invest in a certain factory in this way or in another way? And these trade-off decisions, finance is instrumental in making transparent what the various scenarios are of the decisions that are being taken. I think there's, in addition to that also, a significant role that finance plays in terms of risk management. And quite frankly, we could be perhaps really honest and say that a lot of the reporting that we do at the moment, particularly if we're talking about the P&L and the balances at a quarterly interval, are not really reflecting all the risks and opportunities of that company. In fact, you could almost say they're false, because it may well have been true that in the 70s, 60 to 80% of the value of the company was represented by those financial statements. That's definitely not the case now, particularly with more and more service industry organizations. So it's probably less than 50%. It's a lot more about intangibles, about the people, about the skill sets, talent. We're talking about attracting talent. And that, in some way, needs to be reflected. So I come back to the point about what is the goal of the organization or the company and how do they determine success. And it is finance's role, I strongly believe, to make those factors identifiable, traceable, and be able to be reported upon. So risk and management of risk in terms of the future success is a fundamental role that CFOs play, or the finance function plays. We need, however, as CFOs, to be therefore looking more at our performance much more holistically. So short-term finance is certainly important. We have various stakeholders that we need to satisfy by delivering information on a short-term financial basis. Long-term financial goals, however, are obviously more important, but it's not just the financial goals. We need to find a way to be able to talk about these non-financial, such as our talent, our human capital, our investment in human capital. Why do we believe we're better positioned than maybe some other companies because of what we invest in obtaining training and maintaining talent? This holistic view, I believe, is a key role that finance plays. And the last thing I'd mention about this is we have a significant communication role. That communication role, obviously, internally, we're the guys that normally get called out in terms of budgets and forecasting and target setting and reviewing achievement against those targets on a regular basis. That's internally. But we also have a very significant external communication role. And here I would take a little bit of issue with Roger's very negative comment about certain shareholders. I think that while I agree that there is far too much short-term focus in much of the investment community, I do see it as a role of the CFO and his board colleagues, obviously, or her colleagues, to be clearer in communicating how we internally view our success. What do we believe success is? Making that also transparent to an investment community. You won't get everybody, that's correct. You will, I believe, however, start to get more and more people to believe in your story and to understand, if you're honest about it, and if you're clear about what those key particular guideposts are for the future and how you expect to achieve those particular goals. So there's a communication role, that's a specific CFO finance one. There's a risk management role, which, I mean, if you are thinking of some companies where they have perhaps sources of resources that may not have the value that they currently think they may have, or their whole business model may be at risk in terms of climate change. I mean, TCFD and others give us an opportunity to try and address those things and make those transparent. but there's a whole risk management aspect there, and there is very definitely that normal role of maintaining the business's performance and reporting and making that transparent in ways that are not just, however, financial.
So if I could just say, I mean, I understand, like I agree entirely with the importance of the role of the CFO, and I agree entirely with your description of what the CFO should do, but we've got to actually ask what they do, right? And Campbell Harvey of Duke did this wonderful piece of research where he surveyed CFOs of large companies, 400 large companies, and over half of them freely admitted on the survey, over half, that they would readily delay investments to make this quarter's earnings. And that's, I mean, that's the kind of question where if it was 25% admitting it and the other 75% dissimulating out, have said it's more than 25. This is 50% just, yeah, absolutely, that's what I do. So it would be nice. I know it's, what?
And I don't know whether we get into a debate here about some attitudes on companies on one side of the Atlantic, the other, but I do believe, and I understand and I accept that there is considerable pressure on short-term performance achievement. But then perhaps the target setting or the communication of that target wasn't that good in the first place, because they should have been more upfront at the beginning on that.
Regardless, 50% are saying, I delay or just don't do investment. So it wasn't a, do you feel under pressure? Is this hard? It was a very simple question. Do you cancel or delay investments that you know are above, it was specific, that investments that would be above the cost of capital, so they're investments you know absolutely you should make for quarterly earnings pressure. That is the reality of what's happening.
Hey, Paul, do you want to jump in?
No, I just want to frame it a little broader again. If you look at the macro statistics in the world, there is obviously something going on that we don't like. The number of companies that, if you look at retained earnings and share buybacks, share buybacks and special dividends exceed retained earnings. Companies are not investing. Publicly traded companies in the US have moved from 4,600 about 30 years ago to 2,600 now. Companies are not there anymore wanting to be public, which is a serious issue if you want to spread wealth. And then if you make the difference between publicly traded companies and privately traded companies, you see a factor 3 to 6 in investment for the long term. Now, interestingly, if you talk to any investor, of course they want you to do the right things for the long term, because most of your institutional investors are pension funds, which they want to be sure that they have a return that is in the future. And actually, if you talk to them, they also want a world that their retirees can live in. So I think the trends are to the downturn, but to blame the financial market would be a little bit simple. What has happened in the global economy, especially since the financial crisis, we've pumped too much money in. Too much money is chasing return. We have $12 trillion with 0 or negative interest rates still today in this world. So they're chasing returns. That's not a good thing, because they'll go for these shorter term returns and dysfunctionalize the financial market. The second thing is our uncertainties in the world have increased. We are in a much more volatile world. The result of that are the negative consequences that we discount future cash flows too much and put much more value on today's returns than tomorrow's returns. And finally, we have a economic system that has evolved, and Robin was referring to that. The real value of a company is not anymore so visible with its fixed assets, and which used to be 85% in 1975, it has actually dropped down to 15 to 20%. So what do we need to do is the more important thing, and how do we need to get out of it? We've created a global alliance which is called Focusing Capital on the Long Term. We have about $34 trillion of money under management there. We have the principle of responsible investment that are now driving it with Fiona. We have $82 trillion of management sit there. So whilst there will undoubtedly be elements of the financial market that will be short-term, and to some extent you need them, we just now need to move the bulk of the financial market to the longer term. Theoretically, you'd say that should be possible because you put Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity, BlackRock in the same room, and you have about the economy of the US, you have about 25% of the total shareholdings in any publicly traded company, including ours. If these people would behave like adults and put the interest of the common good and the long term ahead of their own short-term interest, you could actually change it. What we are now doing is a few things. First of all, the asset owners, which is partly us. Most of us have pension funds. Unilever, a 26 billion pension fund. Every CEO is complaining about the short-termism, but their pension funds is often invested in the same way by trying to beat the market on a quarterly basis, by incentivizing their pension managers. So the fund managers. So you need to, first and foremost, ensure that the asset owners are clear about the benefit of the long-term return, which is increasingly showing in data to give you a much better return than the short term. The second thing you do is that the asset managers need to be incentivized differently. Hero, who runs the Japanese investment fund, is now incentivizing them on 3 to 5 year terms, and it's drastically changing the way they behave. Al Gore with his generation fund, long-term investors. In Unilever, we've moved all of our fund managers to long-term incentives, and our returns have actually become better. Then you get to the boards, which is very clear. If you ask CEOs right now, the bulk of the CEOs would say the boards are putting pressure on us. So we need to work on the fiduciary duties for the board. We have gotten a little bit wrong on the fiduciary duties. The fiduciary duties are not to the shareholders in nearly any jurisdiction. The fiduciary duties are to the long-term survival of the company, the multi-stakeholder model. The extreme of that is the benefit corporations, where we have 2,600, but there is no reason in any of the laws that I've looked at in any country that the board needs to understand that its fiduciary duties go beyond the shareholder. And by the way, if you would say they would be the shareholder, then have a board discussion on what that means, because you will have shareholders that want you to be a growth company, that want to have share buybacks, that want special dividends, that want you to invest for the longer term. There is not one shareholder. If in fact you would listen to the shareholder, you'd most likely be bankrupt earlier than you're already on the current trajectory. So the multi-stakeholder model is very important. And then you come to the CEO itself, and there I believe it's in leadership. I personally believe that anything that needs to be solved today can be solved if we have the human willpower. I like human willpower because it's a renewable ingredient, and we need more renewable things in this world. But if a CEO would decouple his salary from this short-term rat race, I could have earned more during my 10 years in Unilever if I would have always run the company on 6 cylinders. Instead, we have 10 years of top and bottom line growth in a very consistent way that is giving us the 300% return. Any year I could have easily moved the ball out of the ballpark, like some of these companies are doing. Some of them try to even take us over. Easy to do, easy to do. But to do it consistently long term requires that balance of investing a little bit for the short and the longer term. And by the way, the investors would like you to do that. And by the way, they are letting you do it. Look at the investors right now. They're letting you invest in factories that only pay out in 5 to 10 years before you fill them up, in some industries longer. They're letting you invest in IT systems that have 20, 25-year horizons. They're letting you invest in human capital because they want the next CEO. You don't even know if those investments are going to pay out, but they're backing you. Why wouldn't they be willing to let you invest in the future of humanity? It doesn't make any sense. They will let you. But we need to explain that as CSOs. We need to walk the talk by adjusting our compensation systems. There is no law that requires you to do quarterly guidance. Many countries you don't need to do quarterly reporting. In Unilever, we went away on that the day I came. Because the first day I came on the job, I abolished both. Because I wanted to show that we are going to run this company for the long term. And my simple principle was the day they're going to hire me, they're not going to fire me. And it sort of worked out for me. But you can do this in most of the jurisdictions today. And then you have to better communicate. What investors will play back to you is, help us. Help us to see the materiality. Help us to understand these intangibles, why they are giving you a perfect competitive advantage. There are very few CEOs, unfortunately, that can talk about the human capital as being a long-term value that should be calculated into their investment decisions. There are very few CEOs that can have a discussion with investors why decarbonizing your value chain is so important for the future, for them as well as us. So we need to bring the dialogue up to a higher level, and this is where the CFOs definitely have to play an important role, but bring these dialogues up to a higher level to show the investor community really why it's so important that we not only have financial, but also environmental and social investments. We are talking here, by the way, once more, about the future of humanity.
Okay. Robin, everyone wants to jump in. Robin, you start.
Very briefly, just pick up on what Paul said. Absolutely agreed. And this trend now with some of these large asset owners, or called asset owners, I mean, basically we're the asset owners, but basically these large funds, and particularly the Japanese pension fund with 1 trillion under management, they're really starting to do this. Now, we have to address the incentive side for management and for asset fund managers, but the other point I believe that is crucial at the moment is comparability. A lot of these fund managers are quite interested in at least trying to understand whether they make their decisions purely on this is another point, but at least asking their companies now or their portfolio managers to have the companies report on some of these non-financial KPIs. The issue is at the moment, however, is that these are not all that comparable. We have the situation in Europe where we are required now to publish some non-financial KPIs. That's great, but it's left to the companies themselves to determine what they will show. And so it might be we've saved so much water in our headquarters, or we've saved photocopying, or blah, blah, blah. But what we need are KPIs which are relevant, but also allow comparability. And that's why I'm really excited that, and Paul personally was involved in setting this up. The embankment project from Inclusive Capitalism, which was published the report just 2 weeks ago, has really tried to address this. It's not addressing everything, but it's trying to say, okay, how do we then come up with KPIs that we can agree on that address things like human capital and allow these asset owners to judge us on our performance and compare us with our competitors. And if you haven't seen the report, you can download it on Epic-Value. This is the report hot off the press. I just happen to have a copy with me. But it is identifying about 60 different KPIs, and people that have been involved in that include all of these large investment houses that Paul mentioned, and Paul's company himself. So there is an attempt there. So Roger's going to come in now and say it's great, but people are starting to do this, and I think we need to encourage them to do this. Companies need to start having the guts to start talking about this more and really forcing this communication.
Okay, so Roger quickly, and then Isabelle, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to disappoint you on this, but I would love if pension funds, which should have the longest term perspective, would be a group that I could feel more confident about. But it begs the following question. What are the world's pension funds doing when they supply 90% of the lent stock that have one purpose? You know, you borrow a stock to do what, Robin? To short, right? So the pension funds, the world's pension funds, are supplying the short-selling hedge funds with 90% of the stock that they use to put on a perpetual $6 to $7 trillion short on the world's equity markets, markets that their pensioners would like to have as high as possible. And it's even worse than that. If they just had the short, it would be equilibrium, right? But it's putting on and pulling off and jerking around companies. So the world's pension funds are engaging in something that is absolutely against the interests of their pensioners, absolutely against them in every respect. I would ban pension funds from lending stock. If you banned that, you would have a 90% reduction in the short selling capacity in the world. So there are some things that we just got to do because the actors who should be acting better are not doing so.
Yeah, that sounds relatively easy. Richard, can you do that? So Isabelle, you wanted to jump in.
Well, I share what has been said. Something impressed me. I mean, asset owners ultimately are not the pension funds. Ultimately, it's you and me. And the point is that the same individual that is very aware as acting as a consumer, choosing more and more cars, for example, that are fitting with a more responsible world. So the same individual is consumer, is a worker, and as we see more and more from this point of view, also people really act now. But as savings provider, asset provider, they are not aware. Test that around you. People usually have absolutely no clue about the way their own money is invested. I believe that the 24,000 students who signed the Green Manifesto I mentioned, they are the future saving providers. And the day they are equipped to really track where their money is invested, it will change rapidly. So I would really try to connect the dots to this extent, that is to say, not only to asset owners as we see them usually, that is to say, effectively pension funds, but individuals.
But you have to follow the dots the whole way, Isabelle. The vast majority of pension fund assets in the world are held by pension funds who have a monopoly right to serve. So all those $1 trillion of Japanese, does the Japanese worker who has his or her money going into that pension fund have any choice in where and who it goes to? No, it goes to that pension fund. So the irony is that we, we believe in the power of competition, but in the world of asset ownership, we believe in the power of government-mandated monopolies. That's what the pension fund world dominantly is. Yes, there's the Unilever pension fund, but it's dwarfed in size by CalPERS, the state pension fund. So I think we have to, exactly what you said, Isabelle, follow the dots all the way to the end, and the end is that we have given those people no power. So they can write a letter, but they have no power.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a point, though, that I think we have analyzed the issue, but we need to now try to see how we move forward constructively in a system where multilateralism doesn't work anymore, where global institutions don't function for us, where everybody at the elected level is worried about the financial markets because they are basically, our political system has become subservient to the financial market versus the other way around. So how do we move it one bite at a time instead of trying to swallow the elephant at once? So one of the things I've seen is that there is a huge opportunity with high net worth individuals. And they are actually more purpose driven. There are 8 people in the world now with the same wealth as the 3.5 billion people. So let's get these 8 people in the room and let's discuss with them how they manage their wealth. You know, I had a discussion with Bill Gates. He has quite a lot of money for himself next to the Gates and Melinda Fund. But the money he invests himself doesn't apply nearly the same principles as for which he created the Bill and Melinda Gates funds. So we have to watch it that we don't, on the one hand, create a problem that we then, out of goodness, are trying to solve with benevolence or whatever foundations we create. So the beauty now is we can get to people with high net worths and have a big difference in influencing how their money is being spent. Let's concentrate on that. Secondly, there are a group of companies that you can add up and get quickly to $1 trillion or more in money that belongs to them. I talked to so many CEOs, and myself was included when I came. We didn't even sign up yet to the principles of responsible investment. I didn't even ask the question until year 2 or 3, how are we rewarding our fund managers? So get a big enough group of companies together and say, we are actually asset owners. A little anecdote, when we were attacked by Kraft Heinz, I said, we have to really fix this financial system. So the unions were worried. They like to attack us when we have normal business, but as soon as Kraft Heinz came, they were my biggest buddies in life. I got Christmas cards, Christmas hampers, be invited to every union of the unions and everything. So I said, let's get all in the same room. Soon I had $1 trillion of money under management for the workers, the people that make this world function, in the same room. I said, I'll just have 2 simple questions for you, because you're equally worried, like me, on this cost-cutting strategy and the difference between making another few billionaires versus us serving the billions of people, where, as you can see, I clearly feel strongly about. I said, let me ask you 2 simple questions. Do you know if you invested in them or not? They had no idea, because we have so far removed now from the actual investments and the asset owners. And then the second question was obviously, how do you reward? They had no idea. Well, I said them very simply, you know, you are part of the problem you're trying to fight. So if we can get these people in the room at critical mass, we can move the world forward. Now, there's one big macro problem, which is not so easy to solve, which is that for the first time in the history, and also double as bad as when we had the crisis in 2007, 2008 in the first place, is that we have allowed the financial industry to create so many financial instruments. Roger mentioning one before, that we have a real economy of 100 trillion, but we have financial instruments up to 700 trillion. And if 700 trillion versus 100 trillion real economy, then about 600 trillion, if you keep it simple, you can argue with this, 600 trillion is chasing foo-foo dust to get returns. So we have become total slaves to the financial industry versus the financial industry having to be subservient to us. Basel IIIs and all that stuff have actually not helped, because they have curtailed the financial industry in terms of risk-taking to invest behind these longer-term development projects, especially infrastructures, etc., that they need to do to get this world on the right growth path. So unintended consequences of what we've tried to solve is giving us a situation that I think is out of control for politicians to handle. So let's get the major asset owners together. Let's get the 5 asset managers together in the same room I talked about. Let's look at the high net worth individuals. You are really talking about 20, 25 people that can decide. I work a lot on deforestation. I work on climate change. We're working on human rights in the value chain. I can tell you, these issues are significantly more difficult than trying to solve this. So the question is really, the end of the day, the simple question is, do we care? And as long as our personal greed is for us more important than the future of our children, we're in deep shit. And I use this word deliberately. We're in deep trouble. We need to get people that put the interest of others ahead. And getting those in the room today, without any legislation, can change the course of human history. And unfortunately, it's 5 minutes before 12.
Well,
so that's what we need to do, and that's why we need all of you. You come in this forum because you're exceptional people. You believe that you can do more together than each of you can do individually. But you cannot sit here and listen to the same panels and have the same discussions. You need to come out with 1 + 1 = not 3, but 1 + 1 = 11. You have that responsibility. If you sit here and analyze the problem and don't do anything about it, you are as guilty as the people that are causing this. Not different from anything else.
So, Isabelle, are you more optimistic? I mean, you know, Paul has said it's 5 to 12 and we haven't really done much yet. You sound a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more optimistic because of what young French people and others who are going to, you know, hopefully force, you know, productive change. Are you optimistic that we are making progress in this sort of goal to think more about sustainability, to think more about long-termism, or I don't know, where do you stand?
No, I'm optimistic because we have great leaders who show the way, and I have to say that Paul is part of the few guys who really gave me the courage to shift the group I'm leading, and thank you for that. That's plus the B Team organization you funded, which is great because it allows us to share our experience as CEO and to try to find best practices and to work together. I'm optimistic because this is a society that is changing. This is extremely powerful, extremely powerful. I mean, this is more a question of pace. But you know, since people everywhere, they strongly feel, it's very clear, I believe, not only young generation, by the way, they really feel that we are at the end of something and that we urgently need to reinvent. So we have not to be naive. Everything we said before is true. In particular, the way investors are not supporting enough is a reality. But we have to take our responsibility anyway, and to show that this is possible. And this is possible again. I mean, it's very concrete what we are doing. I'm speaking here today, but a lot of other people are doing equivalent things. But we really shifted in less than 3 years to something that is very low carbon in the energy field, that is focused on energy savings, negawatt, as I am used to say, with a capital N, that is, which is for an energy producer not so, obvious. And it is possible to do things, and I believe that doing things, showing that this is effectively possible, then we will effectively gather more and more people doing the same and just open a new way. And again, that's good for our companies. That's good for the world, that's good for our companies. And we can now prove that with very concrete and simple figures. But again, what makes me really optimistic is the fact that people, the mindset of people really changed. That's like people or the world that changed its classes, you know. That's extremely deep, and then it is powerful. The question is timing, pace, and here we have to continue to fight for effectively a more rapid support in the way we are priced by the market. You know, as I said, we transferred our result. We transformed our result, which was based on coal plus oil, for a significant part, to something which is now based on renewable and low CO2 activities. So we have the same results. The point is, and what is disappointing is that we are not better valued. We have the same level of results, if I compare with the level where we started with, but the quality is better, and we have no premium. So something is not working here. And the name of the game is to manage that the way the result of company is assessed by the market is not only based on quantitative elements, but on qualitative elements. This is really, I believe, the next battle we have to win.
Can I just pick up on one point about this optimism? And I am basically optimistic, although I share Paul's fundamental analysis. But one of the reasons why some of these investors are now starting to sit up and pay attention to this is because they know that competitively, when they're going to be competing for funds in the future, a lot of the next generation that is presumably going to be inheriting a lot of wealth is going to take these sort of factors a little bit more into account, hopefully formally, but at least informally, than perhaps the previous generation did. And so there is also a good business model motivation behind these investment houses, also saying then this is going to be important. If we are going to attract the funds and manage these funds, then we need to be addressing these issues. And that, I think, could be also a very good motivator or catalyst for change here.
So, Roger, I'm going to give you the last word. So we've all been to many conferences where we've sat around and talked about the importance of long-termism, and we've come up with some good ideas and nodded our heads, and a year goes around and there's another panel, and I guess my point for you, I'm curious if you think we've made any progress, but more importantly, what can we all do? I mean, this is a room full of people who passionately care about these issues, who have the ability to do something or to try to do something or to come together and do something. What would your advice be?
Well, I mean, I guess I share the optimism of people are thinking about different things than they were 3, 5, 10 years ago, and so that's all good. I mean, I think we need to make a couple of fundamental structural shifts. So, for example, it should be a citizen's right to not have their government force them to take part of what they earned and put it into a pension fund that they have no choice over, right? We should just change that rule. Then the 24,000 people, Isabelle, who write will be able to take action on it and invest in the pension fund manager that cares about their interests rather than not. So that's a change that you could make, and it wouldn't be impossibly hard. We should ban stock lending by pension funds because it's inconsistent with what we're trying to accomplish. There's a half a dozen things like that that could be done that would start to change the fundamental kind of context and landscape that we're into. And I would take Isabelle's advice, like follow the breadcrumbs all the way to the end. Don't be satisfied with answers that go half the distance, and I think we'll have more fundamental solutions. And I think there's a few, not 20, 30, 40, 50. There's a half a dozen fundamental changes that would make a gigantic change in my view.
Yep. All right, well, we are out of time. I want to thank Robin and Roger and Isabelle and Paul and all of you. This is a great discussion. I wish we had more time, but thank you all.